On May 12, 1994, 46-year-old Bert Allen Mann was slain at his home at 2510 Stargrass Circle in South Austin, Texas. When he came home from work, there was a burglar inside his home. The burglar then stabbed Bert multiple times in the foyer of the home. He succumbed to his injuries in the entryway. He was later found there by his wife. In 1994, Austin Police Department, Lieutenant David Parkinson called the case unusual. He said in most property crimes, the offender would normally flee the scene. They would not become involved in any kind of confrontation with the homeowner. Shortly after the crime happened, news crews spoke to Bert's neighbors. Neighbor Kathy Torrey said, "It was the time of day when children could have been coming home from school. Definitely people coming home from work. There was just a lot of risk with being in a house at that time. It does make it scary." The police believed that the suspect had escaped out of the back door of Bert's house and into the woods behind the home. Bert's perpetrator was injured as he left the home, leaving blood inside for the detectives to collect. But unfortunately, due to a lack of advanced forensic technologies, the case went cold. In 2005, after Austin Police Department's cold case unit was established, the detectives discovered that there was DNA in evidence in connection with this case. The DNA was sent off to the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, to have an original DNA profile completed. That profile was then uploaded to CODIS. It did not turn up a match. In March 2023, the single-source DNA from the case was sent to Bode Technology. Nearly 30 years had passed since the case began. Sergeant Rodriguez said more than 20 detectives worked to solve the case. More than 40 people were looked at as possible suspects. 3 months later, the company returned results to the Austin Police Department, identifying a possible suspect. The suspect was Kenneth Wayne Robbins. He was 22 years old at the time of the crime. The detectives worked over the next couple of months to establish whether Robbins was in Austin at the time of Bert's slaying. Detectives learned that he was living in Lubbock, Texas. He worked as a long-haul truck driver. Detectives tried to work with the Texas Rangers and the DPS Criminal Investigations Division to collect DNA from Robbins. The attempts were unsuccessful, so an Austin Police Department detective wrote a search warrant for Robbins and drove to Lubbock. On September 8, 2023, detectives found Robbins at his work. They served the search warrant and took a sample of his DNA. Robbins refused to speak with the detectives. A few days later, on September 13th, the Austin Police Department was contacted by the owners of the trucking company Robbins worked for. They said their truck was parked at a truck stop in Weatherford, Texas. They said the truck has not moved for a suspicious amount of time. They contacted Weatherford police to do a welfare check. They found Robbins lifeless in his truck. An autopsy later revealed he took his own life. Sergeant Rodriguez said Robbins lived in Austin at the time of Bert's slaying, and he is believed to be the person responsible for his demise. Austin Police Department had written a capital slaying warrant for Robbins. They intended to arrest him and bring him back to Travis County to answer to the charges in the court system. On February 8, 2024, the Austin Police Department classified the cold case as closed. Sergeant Rodriguez said, "Mr. Mann is survived by his wife and his sister, and they are happy enough to have an answer as to the who. I do not know that they will ever have an answer as to the why, and I do not know, quite honestly, if any of those answers would ever be sufficient for their grief." Rodriguez said while DNA is an important tool in investigators' toolboxes, it is not quite an answer. Cases like this still need hard work on behalf of detectives in order to be solved. Kathy May, Bert's younger sister, said it has been emotional hearing the news almost 30 years later. She said she felt like she could walk past Robbins on the street and not even know it. She continued saying that they do not have that big question hanging over their hearts. She had really kind of given up hope that it would happen. She is very grateful that it did. Kathy added that even though her family can begin healing, she feels deep sadness for Robbins' family after finding out the news all these years later. She said, "They stay on my mind all the time, because I cannot imagine learning this after nearly 30 years within your son, husband, and father's background. On March 24, 2012, at 3:36 a.m., 34-year-old Julio Torres was shot and slain while sitting inside his vehicle in the parking lot of the West Reading Diner in West Reading, Pennsylvania. About 2 months later, on May 9th, Jomaine Case, who was 22 at the time, was arrested in connection to the shooting. Investigators later determined that Case was not the person that shot Julio. He was, however, involved in the incident. He was convicted for his involvement. Case and an unidentified gunman had argued with Julio in the parking lot of the diner. Julio was then shot and slain shortly after. There was no information that indicated that Julio knew Case or the unidentified gunman prior to the shooting. Surveillance video from the diner showed Case and the unidentified gunman holding styrofoam cups just before the shooting. Those cups, including one with a bitten-off piece, were collected from the crime scene as evidence. The cups and bitten piece were sent to the Pennsylvania State Police Forensic Crime Laboratory for DNA analysis. An unknown man's DNA profile was developed from the bitten-off piece, but did not match any of the samples contained within existing DNA databases. Another DNA profile, which was linked to Case, was also found on one of the styrofoam cups. The investigation revealed that the gunman was from New York City. He was visiting the area of Reading, Pennsylvania, on the night of the shooting. The gunman remained unidentified, and the case went cold for several years. In 2023, the investigation was reviewed and re-examined by the Berks County Detectives Unit and West Reading Police Department as part of a cold case initiative launched by the Berks County District Attorney's Office. A picture of the alleged gunman was taken with a cell phone in 2012 at a party before Julio's slaying. The photo was extracted from the phone and retained by investigators. In November 2023, investigators used facial recognition software to help identify the person in the photo. Investigators later determined that 39-year-old Vallis Slaughter was the person in the picture. He was originally from Brooklyn, New York. 1 month later, in December, Slaughter was found living with his mother in Jersey City, New Jersey. Investigators then conducted surveillance at the Jersey City address. 2 months later, on February 9th, 2024, investigators spotted Slaughter walking on the sidewalk. He was smoking a cigarette on the 200 block of Fulton Avenue in Jersey City. Before entering his mother's home, Slaughter threw his cigarette onto the sidewalk. The cigarette butt, which was still smoldering, was then collected by detectives. It was sent to the Pennsylvania State Police Forensic Crime Laboratory for DNA comparison to the DNA profile that was initially developed in the case. In March 2024, the laboratory told investigators that the DNA extracted from the cigarette butt matched the DNA profile initially identified on the bitten piece of the styrofoam cup. An arrest warrant for Slaughter was obtained on March 18th by West Reading Police and the Berks County District Attorney's Detectives Unit. He was taken into custody 2 days later at around 6:15 a.m. by Jersey City Police at his mother's home. He is charged with slaying, criminal conspiracy, aggravated assault, and other related offenses. Slaughter is being held at the Hudson County Correctional Facility in New Jersey and is awaiting extradition to Berks County, Pennsylvania. On October 10th, 2005, baby Skylar was found wrapped in newspapers and a towel. She was stuffed in a hotel plastic bag in a trash can in a Terminal 4 women's restroom at the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport in Arizona. She was found by staff that went to help a passenger try to find a missing laptop. As the maintenance workers were going through the trash in a bathroom on the ticketing level, they discovered a black garbage bag stuffed with hotel monogrammed towels. Investigators believe baby Skylar lived for just 24 hours before she was abandoned at the airport. Although she had only been deceased for a matter of hours, the infant's hair and eye color, height, weight, and cause of demise have never been made public. The medical examiner later determined that baby Skylar lost her life from asphyxiation, launching a slaying investigation. Troy Hillman, a retired cold case detective with the Phoenix Police Department who worked on the case for years, described the discovery as divine intervention. Hillman said that if the businessman had not lost his laptop, baby Skylar likely never would have been found. The investigators searched 3 local hotels for guest lists and surveillance. The trail went cold, and they were unable to trace the baby's mother. They suspected the woman had boarded a plane and fled the state after leaving the deceased newborn behind. Hillman said, "She just literally was welcomed into the world only to be slain. It was just horrific." For years, detectives worked the case. Hillman's team joined forces with Parabon Nanolabs in 2017 to create a composite image of what the mother may look like based on DNA collected from the baby. In November 2021, after 16 years, there was finally a break in the case. The FBI helped officers use genetic genealogy to find a maternal match for the victim. That was cross-referenced with DNA collected from the scene. They identified someone in the family tree. That person consented to a DNA sample, which led the investigation further to 51-year-old Annie Anderson. In January 2022, the police served a search warrant and interviewed Anderson. She confirmed she was the baby's mother. Court documents show plainclothes officers asking Anderson to come outside her home in Arlington, Washington, to look at her car. That was when the police arrested her, just 3 days before Christmas, 2023, without incident. She was jailed in Washington. She was then extradited to Arizona and booked into Maricopa County Jail. Hillman expressed his frustration knowing that the baby girl could have survived if Anderson had dropped her off at a hospital instead of leaving her behind. Lieutenant James Hester of the Phoenix Police Department explained that Anderson was visiting the city in October 2005 for a real estate boot camp. He said she gave birth to Skylar at another location before dumping her in the airport bathroom. Anderson is accused of multiple criminal offenses, including slaying and abandonment or concealment of a deceased body. Police know who the father of baby Skylar is. They do not believe that Skylar's father was involved, and Anderson faces first-degree slaying charges. During Anderson's April 2024 hearing, new information was released. She said she gave birth in a hotel room, claiming that the baby was stillborn and delivered into a bathtub filled with water. However, the report says her claims were inconsistent with the medical examiner. The trial or sentencing date must still be announced. Skylar is buried at Paradise Memorial Gardens in Scottsdale, Arizona. On October 25, 1991, Newport, Rhode Island resident Brent Davis was shot and slain at the Brickenwood housing project. After Brent's demise, witnesses identified the suspect as an individual named Bobby. Investigators then created a sketch composite of the suspect. They were able to identify 2 of his relatives who were living in New Bedford. The relatives told investigators that Bobby was also known as Ronaldo Suriel. He was from New York City, but authorities were ultimately unable to find the suspect. The case went cold with no arrests made. The case remained frozen until 2020, when the district attorney's cold case unit began looking at it again. According to the district attorney's office, State Police Trooper Catherine Sullivan soon determined that Ronaldo Suriel was likely also an alias and began interviewing witnesses and others known to associate with Bobby. Through the interviews, investigators learned that the shooting was a result of an illegal substance distribution dispute. They also discovered that Bobby was originally from the Dominican Republic. He fled the city shortly after Brent's demise. One witness admitted to investigators that at the time of the shooting, he and Bobby had been selling illegal substances together. After the shooting, the witness told authorities Bobby came to his girlfriend's apartment and told him Brent was not alive anymore and that he needed to leave New Bedford. Sullivan soon tracked down and spoke to a close relative of the suspect who previously lived in New Bedford. The relative identified Claudio Jorge as the person behind both aliases. They also provided investigators with photos of him that matched the composite sketch from 1991. While Jorge was incarcerated multiple times before Brent's slaying, records show that he was free at the time of the shooting. Additionally, investigators obtained photos of Jorge from the relative and showed them to witnesses. The witnesses confirmed that Jorge and Bobby were the same person and that he had shot Brent. On January 29, 2024, the district attorney's office said in a news release that they believe Claudio Jorge, a Dominican Republic native with a long criminal history, was responsible for the slaying. Jorge was arrested in New York in 1992. He was then deported to the Dominican Republic in 1998. He was 40 years old when he was slain there in 2006. At the time of his demise, someone was trying to rob him. District Attorney Thomas Quinn said in the release, "This case further shows our office does not give up on solving cold cases and will continue to put resources into investigations of cold cases." On May 6, 2008, Shawn Stevens from Lorain County, Ohio, was brutally shot in the back. She was beaten and assaulted. She was then stuffed into the trunk of a car and left till she lost her life behind an abandoned building. Shawn was 43 at the time. She was hiking in the Carlisle Reservation. She was picking mushrooms like she normally did when she was attacked without warning. Matthew Plass, then 25, passed by Shawn while she was hiking near the duck pond in the Metro Parks. As he walked past her, he greeted her and said something like, "Nice day, is it not?" She went to turn around and he then shot her in the back without warning. He then beat her, attempted to rob her, and assaulted her. Then he put her in the trunk of his car after he believed she was no longer alive. She was still alive and able to attract the attention of passers-by. As they called police, Plass drove off at high speed. He then dumped her behind a closed business on Oberlin-Elyria Road. Plass pleaded guilty in November 2009 to charges of kidnapping, aggravated robbery, attempted slaying, and felonious assault, and was sentenced to 33 years in prison. The attack left the mother of 4 and grandmother of 7 paralyzed from the waist down. She spent most of her time in bed or a wheelchair. She was in constant pain. Lorain County Prosecutor J.D. Tomlinson said, "It has just haunted me. Every time I drive by the duck pond, I think about the matter." He also said the attack appeared to be random. Shawn herself said that the 33-year prison term handed down to Place was not nearly enough years in prison. She said, "I wish the judge would have shown him the same mercy he showed me, which was none." Shawn passed away on December 29, 2019, at the age of 55. Lorain County Coroner Dr. Frank Miller ruled her demise as a result of complications from the 2008 attack. The month after her demise, her husband, Mark Stevens, said he wanted Place to serve more time in jail. Mark passed away in July 2020, 7 months after his wife's demise. Shawn's daughter, Carol Schaffer of Fairview Park, echoed her mother's sentiments. She said, 33 years is not enough. He just had gotten out of jail when he did this. He is a Tier 3 offender. Do you think he is not going to come out and do it again? And he cannot even say sorry." Carol was unofficially adopted by Shawn at 4 years old. She said her mother was there for every major moment in her life, from her first fight in school to the birth of her first child. Shawn suffered nerve damage from the attack. She was bedridden and in pain for more than a decade because of it. Plass robbed her of time in her children's and grandchildren's lives. She never got to take her grandchildren to the zoo or the duck pond she loved to visit. After Shawn's demise, Prosecutor Tomlinson says the case was then sent to former Lorain County Prosecutor Dennis Will for review. It was never sent to the grand jury. Tomlinson said, "Indeed, even after I was elected, though I was unaware of it, the Shawn Stevens matter stalled again." Fast forward to late 2023, the Stevens family reached out to the prosecutor's office seeking an update on the status of the case. Tomlinson said the files was then quickly located. He saw the case was assigned for evaluation and referral to the grand jury. Tomlinson said Plas was indicted on slaying charges in the case. Tomlinson said, "The reason we can bring this charge is because Assistant Prosecutor Peter Gauthia refused to plea bargain the first case. And thus, when Shawn passed away, we had the element we needed to charge the slaying." An indictment handed up on February 21st charges 41-year-old Plas with 4 counts of slaying, all with firearm specifications court records show. He is currently incarcerated at Mansfield Correctional Institution. No new trial date is set for Plas. If convicted, he faces the possibility of life in prison with the opportunity for parole. Tomlinson said, "Although justice has been delayed in this case, it will not be denied. We are going forward." Court records show Plas pleaded not guilty when he was arraigned in the slaying case in April 2024. A judge will decide whether the accused perpetrator, Matthew Plas, currently serving a 33-year prison sentence for the 2008 attack that severely injured Shawn Stevens, will continue to face slaying charges, or if those charges are forbidden by law under double jeopardy. On January 13th, 2013, 3 people from Montgomery, Alabama, were found deceased inside a silver Dodge Charger along Interstate 85 ramp in Union City. An officer stumbled upon the car sitting idly on the northbound exit ramp. Inside the car were the bodies of 32-year-old Cheryl Colquit-Thompson, 33-year-old Quinones King, and 43-year-old Rodney Cottrell. Cheryl was found deceased in the trunk from strangulation. Quinones and Rodney were found lifeless from asphyxiation in the back seat. It was determined that all 3 victims were tortured and slain in Clayton County, then dumped in Fulton County. The victims were lured to a residence on Magnolia Drive in Jonesboro. They were then forced into the home at gunpoint and then tortured and slain. They were later loaded into the Dodge and taken to Fulton, where the vehicle was dumped. The families of the victims had suspected that their slayings were a setup. Due to a lack of evidence, the case remained unsolved and went cold, until a breakthrough finally came. On May 8th, 2024, the sheriff's office obtained 12 slaying warrants for the suspects. They immediately started locating them. 4 people have been arrested in connection to the case. The suspects were taken into custody in Alabama, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Officers did not say how the 4 suspects were tied to the case. Details about their arrest have also not been released. Keontae Harris, Kevin Harris, Kenneth Thompson, and Daryl Adams have been arrested. They are all charged with 3 counts of malice slaying. One of the suspects, Keontae Harris, is an assistant principal at McAdory Middle School in Jefferson County, Alabama. He has been placed on paid administrative leave while he is being investigated. Superintendent Walter Gonsoulin said as more facts become available, they will act according to their district's policy. 11 years after the slaying, Tony Garrett with Central Alabama Crime Stoppers still remembers the pain the victims' families felt. Garrett and his team are trying to see if their efforts helped lead to the arrests. He said, "We are still offering the reward for this case, so we are waiting for them to get back to us to see if they had a tipster or if they had information come in to solve the case." Garrett said, no matter how old the case is, it is still approached with the same urgency. Thanks to new technology, many more cases are being solved. Law enforcement agencies in Clayton County, Georgia, are leading the investigation. So far, it is not known what led investigators to the suspects. Crime Stoppers is in touch with the victims' families. They say they will speak out when they are ready. A grand jury indicted Keontae Harris, Daryl Adams, Kenneth Thompson, and Kevin Harris. The date of their next court appearance must still be announced.
On April 29, 2017, Leon County deputies responded to a report of a skull found in the 2000 block of Road 145 on the west side of Neosho Rapids, Kansas, on the banks of the river. The witness that found the skull said that he walked to the river to see how high the water had risen from recent rain when he noticed the skull. More remains were found inside a fitted bedsheet and comforter inside a lawn trash sack, as well as a digital watch. The sack was tied at the top, but animals had torn into the bag to access the remains. Leon County Sheriff's detectives also responded to the scene and took over the investigation. After the autopsy was conducted, it was found that the man lived with scoliosis as he had a curve in his spine. It was also discovered that the man was middle to late aged, with a height of 5 foot 5 inches, and that he likely lost his life between 2013 and 2016. The cause of his demise was unclear at the time. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System 4 months later, in August 2017. Despite extensive efforts and the submission of forensic evidence to the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia for DNA analysis in 2018, the identity of the deceased remained a mystery. Over the years, Detective Sergeant Travis Mishler of the Leon County Sheriff's Office said, detectives diligently worked to identify the Neosho Rapids John Doe. Leon County deputies started working with Othram in 2022, 5 years after the human remains were found. That partnership developed new leads for law enforcement to follow, and in March 2024, Leon County detectives contacted a possible relative of the unknown man. That resulted in them finally identifying the man as Randy Bruce Clayton. Randy was born on October 12, 1953. He was from the Phoenix, Arizona area and lived in Oklahoma. Randy was never reported missing. Colby Lesioni, Director of Operations at Othram, said the following: I think it is important for people to not give up hope. The technology is here and available to help resolve cases such as this. And, the number one barrier at this point is funding, and that is changing. If folks want to support and are not able to financially, advocacy is very important. Advocating for new and different technologies to help bring resolution in these types of cases is very helpful and important. The investigation into Randy's case continues. If you have information that could help provide justice, contact the Leon County Sheriff's Office at 620-341-3205 or Kansas Bureau of Investigation at 785-296-8200. On January 24, 1985, a truck driver discovered the remains of a woman on Highway 78 in Olive Branch, Mississippi, just east of the Coldwater Bridge. She had been strangled with a ligature. The woman's shoes, undergarments, and jacket were missing. Through its investigation, the DeSoto County Sheriff's Office determined the deceased to be a female weighing approximately 110 pounds, standing 5 foot 3 inches tall, and somewhere between the ages of 20 and 35 years old. They noted that she had red to blonde hair, 3 small piercings in each ear, tattoos on the inside of both ankles, and a surgical scar on her left forearm. No other identifying characteristics could be determined for the woman, and she was classified as a Jane Doe. The case went cold for 39 years. That was until 2022, when the DeSoto County Sheriff's Office and the Mississippi Office of the State Medical Examiner received funding from Carla Davis, a Mississippi native and philanthropist who is committed to helping resolve the backlog of cold cases in Mississippi, to send forensic evidence to Othram to see if there was a match for the remains. The sheriff's office have also reviewed multiple accounts from people claiming that the Jane Doe might have been a missing relative. Leads were investigated and ruled out by DeSoto County's crime scene technician and evidence clerk Amber Edlin. Finally, Othram was able to match the body's DNA in March 2024, nearly 40 years later. A relative, the woman's brother in California, was contacted. The woman was then finally identified as Lorie Ann Mueller Pennell. Lorie Ann was born in Missouri on September 6, 1962. This means that she was only 23 years old when she lost her life. She had been seen days before her disappearance at a truck stop in West Memphis, Arkansas. Thereafter, her family filed a missing persons report, but she was never found. Lorie Ann's remains were buried at Blocker Cemetery in Olive Branch, inscribed with the name Jane Doe, January 24, 1985, the date her body was found. The Sheriff's Department says work will continue to find the person or persons responsible for the crime. We believe that justice has no time restrictions, the DeSoto County Sheriff's Department said in a press release. Therefore, we will relentlessly work towards locating the perpetrators so that they can be held accountable for their actions. On April 18, 1993, a biologist conducting a tortoise survey in the desolate area near Tropicana Avenue and Durango Drive in Las Vegas, Nevada, stumbled upon a chilling scene. Half buried in the dirt, concealed beneath several large rocks, lay a handmade quilt. Upon closer examination, the biologist noticed human hair and the unmistakable odor of decomposition. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, LVMPD, cold case investigator Terry Miller said, "The Clark County coroner determined the woman likely lost her life in mid to late 1991 from multiple gunshot wounds. Despite the investigative efforts of law enforcement, the woman could not be identified, and she became known as Jane Tropicana Doe. The case went cold." In February 2023, the Metro Police requested that Othram conduct a forensic genetic genealogy investigation of the remains. At last, after more than 3 decades, the LVMPD cold case section identified the victim as Linda Sue Anderson, also known as Linda Sue Andrews. Linda's brother's DNA matched with the then unidentified victim. She was a 38-year-old mother of 3 at the time of her demise and stayed in Henderson, Nevada. Her family last heard from her during a phone call in 1991. Unfortunately, her children thought for all these years that their mother abandoned them due to her suffering from a mental illness, and therefore she was never reported as missing. Mikhail Kolishian, one of Linda's daughters, told the 8 News Now investigators, "So this whole time we were thinking that she left us and she did not love us. This is a huge thing in our lives." Linda was living with her husband in Henderson, Nevada, while her children were staying in northern Nevada with their father. "We called each other all the time on the phone," Mikhail said. But one day in 1991, Mikhail's stepfather told her and her siblings that their mother decided to leave and start a new life. "He came home. Her stuff was gone," Mikhail said about that conversation. "She left a note that she was starting a new life. She does not want anyone to go find her." Mikhail never saw the note, she said. A copy of divorce records filed in 1992 reveals her stepfather believed he last saw Linda in October 1991. Mikkel said she was told her mother was living a double life and having an affair. Everyone was just shocked, she said. They were like, I do not understand why she would leave her children. Linda would not do that. And then we were just like, well, she did. She left us. Mikkel said she hoped one day her mother would contact her. She never expected that call from Metro Police. To know that she had been slain, and we are wondering if she suffered, and we are wondering what she is thinking, and who did this to her. We do want to find answers. The hope now is that Linda's identification would lead to more information about who took her life. Anyone with information about Linda Sue Anderson or the events leading to her demise is urged to contact the LVMPD at 702-828-3521. Alternatively, anonymous tips can be submitted to Crime Stoppers at 702-385-5555. On July 19, 1972, a local teenage boy passing along through the area close to Withlacoochee State Forest in Hernando County, Florida, found the remains of a woman's body. It was in the area of High Corner Road and Cortez Boulevard in Brooksville. The victim was discovered wrapped in a bedspread with a distinctive pattern, possibly described as a pineapple damask print. The bedspread had 3 square corners and 1 rounded corner. Upon investigation, authorities concluded that the woman had been strangled 3 to 4 days before her discovery. She was about 5 feet tall, between 30 and 40 years of age, weighed between 125 and 145 pounds, with short brown hair and with just 6 upper and 6 lower teeth. At the time, investigators believed that the woman had traveled to Hernando County from either North Florida or Alabama. Details in the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs. Her case grew cold and became the oldest unsolved case in Hernando County. In 2015, the remains were exhumed for additional testing and to make a reconstruction. Isotope tests indicated that she had lived in the United States for at least 5 to 10 years and spent several years in Florida. Investigators then nicknamed her Edna, due to her facial features in the reconstruction. Detectives released the facial reconstruction made of clay to the public, hoping it would spur some tips. Then, in 2022, the Hernando County Sheriff's Office contacted Othram to seek assistance. On October 11, 2022, Michael Vaughan from Othram contacted HCSO Detective George Lloydgren with a possible name. Lloydgren was able to collect a reference sample from a possible member of the woman's family and submit it to Othram. In 2024, after 52 years, the remains were identified as Peggy Joyce Shelton, born in Kentucky on March 30, 1943. Peggy may have been seen alive a few days prior with 2 other individuals aside a white 1961 or 1962 Ford Falcon. The group was witnessed in the area exiting the vehicle and venturing into the woods, returning sometime later without one group member. The Hernando County Sheriff's Office confirmed that Peggy had connections to Hopkins County, Texas, before she lost her life. The case is still being investigated by Detective Lloydgren in an effort to identify the person or persons responsible for the demise of Peggy. If you have any information on this case, please get in touch with Detective George Lloydgren at 352-754-6830. On June 21, 2000, in Winter Park, Florida, a citizen saw cats playing with something. He went to see what it was and found a human skull at the Orange County apartment community. The Orange County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene and investigated the area. More skeletal remains, as well as clothing, were found partially buried in a nearby vacant lot. A small-caliber gun was also found near his remains. After the autopsy was conducted, forensic anthropologists determined that the remains were that of a white male between the ages of 40 and 60 years. The man's remains had been buried for approximately 7 to 8 years prior to discovery. They determined that he lost his life after he had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, as there was a hole in his skull. Due to a lack of victimology, the case went cold. The sheriff's office submitted forensic evidence to Othram Labs in August 2022, 22 years after the unknown man's remains were first discovered. They extracted DNA from the remains, and in January 2024, Othram identified him as Paul Laurence Larry Rougeux, Jr. He was born on October 29, 1951, and was approximately 40 years old at the time of his demise. Larry was raised in the Winter Park area with his siblings and was a graduate of Orlando's Colonial Park High School. The Orange County Sheriff's Office urges anyone with any information that could help solve the case of Larry Rougeux to contact Detective Lowen at 407-254-7000. On December 12, 1994, skeletal remains of a woman were discovered off Tom Hicken Road in Sugarloaf Township, Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, during a mining reclamation project. A state worker found her and saw her skeleton was scattered between the top and bottom of a coal bank. She was left above ground with no evidence of burial. A foreign metal fragment was located in the lower jaw. Authorities responded to the scene and determined that the remains were that of a female who was approximately 5 foot 1 inches to 5 foot 4 inches tall. It was estimated that she was between the ages of 34 and 47 years at the time of her demise, and that she had lost her life between 6 months to 2 years prior to being found. Despite extensive efforts, including comparisons and leads, the identity of the woman remained a mystery due to the condition of the remains, which rendered determining a cause and manner of demise impossible. There was a model of her face that forensic artist Frank Bendor made after studying her skull in 1996. The sculpture, circulated widely in the media, was one attempt to identify her over the years. She became known as Sugarloaf Jane Doe. Unfortunately, the case went cold. In 2021, authorities released a computer-generated likeness of the unknown victim and offered a reward for any information. Through recent advancements in DNA technology and forensic genealogy, a possible relative of this unidentified woman was discovered by Othram. Investigators say they interviewed the relative and an additional DNA sample was obtained, confirming the relative was her sister. In February 2024, after nearly 3 decades, state police reported that the unidentified woman was positively identified as Margaret Carol Wininger. She was born on September 5, 1948 in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. She was living with her family in Northeast Philadelphia until she went missing in the early 1990s. Margaret attended West Hazelton High School from 1965 to 1966. She was maid of honor for a wedding at Our Lady of Grace R.C. Church in 1968. Her parents divorced in 1965, and her father had been a greenskeeper at Valley Country Club. Her sister joined the Women's Army Corps after high school. While the identification of Margaret brings some closure, the investigation into her tragic end is ongoing. State police are urging anyone who may have come into contact with her in the Luzerne County area during that time to come forward with any information. In a statement, State Police Trooper Brian Knoll said, "Although 30 years old, this investigation was never set aside. And with the advancements in technology, troopers persisted with the investigation. As with any cold case, members of the Pennsylvania State Police will never give up and always strive to conduct a thorough investigation, serving the people of this Commonwealth to the highest level." Trooper Brian Knoll from the Pennsylvania State Police Troop Criminal Investigation Assessment Unit can be reached at 570-220-8475. On May 24, 1985, the remains of an unidentified male were discovered in a vacant lot near Gibsonton, Florida. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene. It was determined that the man lost his life due to a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was between the ages of 40 and 60 years at the time of his end. He was likely 5 foot 6 inches to 5 foot 10 inches tall. Investigators also found several articles of clothing and other personal items at the scene. A forensic composite was developed and released to the public in hopes that it would generate leads about the man's identity. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs, as UP207. Despite investigators' best efforts, the man could not be identified, and the case went cold. In 2023, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office teamed with Othram to determine if advanced DNA testing could help to identify the man. The investigation led them to possible relatives of the unknown man, whose disappearance in the mid-1980s had left no digital footprint for the last 40 years. Detectives traveled to Knoxville, Tennessee in January 2024, where they met with a family member of the man and matched his DNA with the decedent's from 1985. The man was identified in 2024 as Mr. Charles Allen Ray, born in 1936. He was an honorable veteran of the United States Navy. Chief Deputy Joe Maurer of the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office said, "We were able to establish a link to Mr. Ray and his family, so we were able to bring closure to his family. For nearly 40 years, his family had no idea what happened to Mr. Ray." Advancements in technology, especially in the criminal justice realm, have furthered our abilities to solve crimes. On December 20th, 1987, a woman's remains were found by a passerby walking a dog near the intersection of 130th Avenue and 72nd Court, north of Royal Palm Beach in Florida. The autopsy report showed that she was in her 20s to 30s and had brown hair with gray streaks. She had been there for a long period of time, and foul play was suspected. No clothing or jewelry were with the remains. She could have suffered from severe arthritis or a back injury, and she had a fracture on the right clavicle. Shortly after her remains were found, authorities released a forensic sketch of what the victim may have looked like, but they got no leads and it became a cold case. In 2023, thanks to a grant from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, PBSO submitted forensic evidence to Othram to identify the woman. In February 2024, 36 years later, Othram identified her as Pati Lisa Loguercio Rust from Lauderdale by the Sea in Broward County, Florida. She was born in 1960. Her parents were Elizabeth B. English and Anthony Loguercio, and she had two brothers, Stephen and Anthony. She married Kenneth Allen Rust on November 11, 1984, and then went missing in 1986. Connor Ward, a resident of Palm Beach, said, "I am happy they found whoever that was. I think it is pretty cool that technology has come such a long way where they can just figure out who a person is just by facial recognition or DNA structures or stuff like that." Stuart Kaplan, a former FBI agent who now works as a defense attorney in Palm Beach, said, "The first thing now is you have a name, you have a person. The first thing I would do is obviously reach out to the family." Kaplan says detectives will likely try to interview anyone who is close to Pati, such as her husband or ex-husband, her siblings, a boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, best friend, and her former co-workers. PBSO is asking anyone with information on Pati to contact Detective John Cogburn at 561-688-4063. Two fishermen discovered a body of a man in a drainage area on a freight property in Bensalem, Pennsylvania, in October 2003. He had no identification, and his description did not match any reports of missing people in the area. An autopsy was performed, and it was determined that there was no trauma to the body, and that the cause was drowning. The manner could not be determined, police said. He was between 30 and 40 years of age. Bensalem police compared the unknown man to numerous missing person reports over the next 19 years without success. He was buried beneath a marker bearing a placeholder name in the Doylestown Cemetery while attempts to identify him continued. A former Bensalem Township police detective and cold case investigator, McMullen, 54, became preoccupied with finding a modern way to solve open-ended cases. In 2022, he founded Cold Case Initiative, a nonprofit that helps fund such investigations, which can be expensive. In December 2022, Bensalem police obtained hair samples from the Bucks County Coroner's Office that were collected at the autopsy. The samples were sent to a private laboratory, which obtained a DNA profile. The funding was received from Cold Case Initiative. In October 2023, the search and subsequent investigation led investigators to speak with a man that said his son went missing around the time the body was found. He provided a DNA sample and it was a match. The body was then identified as Edward Anthony Nece. "This one is our first solve," McMullen said Tuesday. "We are so excited." Edward's father, 75, a retired diesel mechanic, said that these days he is still feeling foggy, a little confused about it all. "I waited 20 years for word about my son," he said. He and his former wife would go to police stations to file missing persons reports, and to check in to learn whether officers had picked up any clues. This was before cell phone days, when you could maybe find someone, he said. He added that the spot where his son was found was not far from his home. I just found it extremely hard to believe someone could go missing less than a mile from your house, and it takes 2 decades to find out, he said. I do not know what to say. I have felt relief, but sadness. But then I get to have closure. He was buried properly. His mother and I have been up to the cemetery, and we changed that nameplate from an unknown to his name. We are now in the process of putting up a gravestone. Edward, who was 31 when his body was discovered, had worked as a forklift operator at a trucking firm in Delanco. He was really happy, making real good money. Things were going well for him. The Bensalem police said, "We would like to recognize the diligent effort of Bensalem Township Police Department detectives and the Cold Case Initiative Partnership. Without their assistance, the family of Edward Anthony Nece would still be wondering what happened to their loved one." While the man has been identified, officials have not said if they have determined a manner of demise or if any foul play was involved.
On November 17, 2017, 15-year-old December 2 was working at a Kansas City, Kansas laundromat when he was fatally shot. A fellow employee found December deceased inside the Maple Hill laundromat, located in the 2400 block of South 34th Street, the following morning. December was a sophomore at Harmon High School. December's family immigrated to the United States from Myanmar when he was just 6 years old. They fled to avoid the violence in their home country. Family and friends remember December as a bright and talented student, singer, son, brother, and athlete. He was fluent in English, his second language. He aspired of someday becoming a mixed martial arts fighter. He was a member of the J.C. Harmon High School wrestling team, where his daring style earned him a reputation in his freshman year. The team had just finished its first week of practice when he passed away. There were no eyewitnesses to the shooting. Evidence collected during the investigation included shell casings and grainy surveillance footage. Detectives were frustrated by the case. The security camera system inside the laundromat that night was not working. Security cameras across the street were also not set to record. The only camera system that did work was too far away and pointed in the wrong direction, which was not much help. Leads proved tough to come by, and the case quickly went cold. A new cold case detective was assigned to the case in May of 2024. Detective Lily Suk began conducting more interviews. She searched through what little video footage was left from the night of the shooting. In June 2024, there was a breakthrough. Detective Suk was able to connect a vehicle captured in exterior footage from the scene to Luis Simano, placing him at the crime scene. Simano is a 24-year-old man who was around 16 or 17 years old at the time of the shooting. Online records with the Kansas Department of Corrections show that he has been held at the state facility since 2019 on 2 felony arson convictions in Johnson County. Simano had an extensive criminal history in Johnson County before and after December's slaying. He was charged with a series of burglaries involving washers and dryers at apartment complexes in 2014 and again in 2015. Simano was sentenced to 9 years and 5 months in state prison in March 2019 for the burglary charges. It is unclear if Simano was charged with any crimes in Wyandotte County as a juvenile. In 2021, the police recovered a gun during an illegal substance-related arrest in Lenexa. A detective assigned to the case interviewed the gun owner, who said Simano had stolen it. In 2022, a forensic lab test by the KBI confirmed the gun was the weapon used in the shooting, but police lacked any evidence at the time that placed Simano at the crime scene. On July 11, 2024, Simano was charged with slaying and attempted aggravated robbery by the Wyandotte County District Attorney's Office in the slaying of December. He was being held at the Larned State Mental Health Facility, following a conviction in a separate case. Detective Sook said that they believe there was not really a motive for the shooting. They believe it was just a robbery that had gone wrong. A family statement said, "December is loved and is deeply missed by his family, friends, and community. He always smiled, had a positive energy, and always participated in his community, including his church youth camp and Bible study. We want to thank the community and the police department for looking at the case again. We understand it is pretty hard to get cold cases solved. In our culture, we had never experienced something like this because our Karen community was fairly new to the US. We think it is wonderful and are grateful for the work that detectives did." On July 15, 1990, officers with the DeKalb County Police Department, DKPD, responded to a report of a stabbing at an apartment complex on Tree Hills Parkway in Stone Mountain, Georgia. Upon arriving, DKPD officers found 43-year-old Pamela Sumpter at a neighbor's apartment. She was assaulted and stabbed. Her 46-year-old brother, John Sumpter, had also been stabbed. John was found deceased in the apartment that the siblings shared. Pamela was transported to an area hospital where an assault kit was collected. The kit was found to include male DNA belonging to her attacker. While hospitalized, Pamela was interviewed by DKPD officers. She provided them with a detailed description of the man who attacked her and took her brother's life. She told investigators that the man was a new acquaintance of her brother. She said he was from Detroit, Michigan. Pamela succumbed to her injuries 21 days later, on August 5, 1990. The case unfortunately went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In 2022, state investigators sent the kit for testing. In February 2023, the DNA from the kit was uploaded to a statewide DNA database. Unfortunately, there was no match. In February 2024, the DeKalb County District Attorney's Office worked with the GBI to upload the STR DNA profile for the unknown male suspect at the national level. They received a match to an unprosecuted 1992 assault case from Detroit, Michigan. At the same time, with no match to a known individual, the DeKalb County District Attorney's Office teamed with Othram to determine if advanced DNA testing could help to identify the unknown suspect in the case. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence and used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown man. Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team then used this profile to conduct genealogy research, ultimately providing new investigative leads to law enforcement. Using these new investigative leads, paired with the case file from the 1990 unprosecuted assault, investigators identified a likely suspect in the case, 55-year-old Kenneth Perry of Loganville, Georgia. On June 6, 2024, members of the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office Fugitive Unit executed an arrest warrant, and Perry was taken into custody without incident. Investigators collected a DNA sample from Perry to confirm that he was the perpetrator in the 1990 case. The DNA sample collected from Perry at the time of his arrest matched to the DNA sample collected in Pamela Sumpter's 1990 assault kit. A DeKalb County grand jury has indicted Perry on 2 counts of malice slaying, 2 counts of felony slaying, assault, 4 counts of aggravated assault, 2 counts of aggravated battery, 2 counts of possession of a knife during the commission of a felony, and theft by taking, all in connection with the 1990 assault and slaying of 43-year-old Pamela Sumpter and the slaying of her brother, 46-year-old John Sumpter. Perry is in custody at the DeKalb County Jail, where he is being held without bond. The victim's brother, James Sumpter, said, "It has been over 30 years since this terrible, evil tragedy happened to my brother and sister. We now have closure. I pray that the justice system prevails. Anyone who believes they may have information about Kenneth Perry or the slayings of John and Pamela Sumpter is encouraged to call the District Attorney's Cold Case tip line at 404-371-2444. On June 11, 2000, Julie Ann McDonald's body was discovered at her home on Arnold Lane in Lafayette in Walker County, North Georgia. At the time of her demise, she was 42 years old. She worked as a pharmacist at a hospital in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Her cause of demise was stabbing, and she had been restrained as well. A checkbook was stolen from her home. The investigators believe she had been deceased for several days before her body was discovered. Initially, in 2000, 4 or 5 people were identified as suspects in the case. One of the suspects was found in neighboring Catoosa County with Julie's checkbook. However, there was not enough evidence to make any arrests at the time, and the case went cold. 5 years later, in 2015 to 2016, the case was reinvestigated. Unfortunately, tests on evidence could still not identify the suspect responsible, and it stayed a cold case. In 2022, the case was reviewed again. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation Special Agent in Charge, Joe Montgomery, said lab testing linked evidence to Clarence D. George. Agent Montgomery declined to discuss what motive George may have had for ending Julie's life, but he was the suspect who had her checkbook. Walker County Sheriff Steve Wilson said the 63-year-old George was arrested in Birmingham on August 22, 2024, and awaits extradition to Georgia. George remained in the Jefferson County Jail in Birmingham, and it is unclear if he has a lawyer to speak for him. George has a lengthy arrest record in Alabama, but not for violent crimes. Investigators said they believe Julie and George knew each other before he took her life. Sheriff Wilson said, "I would not want to categorize them as friends, because I do not think friends take the life of their friends, but they were acquaintances." The Georgia Bureau of Investigation and the Walker County Sheriff's Office announced that they have charged George with slaying and aggravated assault in the case. Agent Montgomery said that it was not just science that led to the breakthrough in the case, but also a lot of hard work by detectives, some of whom have since retired. He continued by saying, "It was a lot of legwork and door knocking. Sometimes they would run into a brick wall, but they kept going." Sheriff Wilson said Julie's nearest surviving relatives are a niece and a nephew, who have been notified of the arrest. He said, "There is some sense of relief that the family can put it behind them and go on. Not that it gives them great joy, but it is the fact that they know a person has been held accountable." On March 5, 1995, the bodies of 28-year-old Kimberly Fulton and her 17-month-old son, Daniel Fulton, were found in the burned remains of their mobile home in Palmer Township, Washington County, Ohio. An autopsy later revealed that Kimberly and Daniel had passed away before the fire was set. The investigators assumed that the fire was set to cover up the slaying. The case originally had one arrest in 1998, 3 years later, but due to a lack of evidence, he was released after about 3 weeks. The case then went cold. In October 2021, a breakthrough finally came, more than 25 years later, when 49-year-old Scott A. Hickman was indicted and charged with slaying and aggravated slaying. He was the same person that was arrested all those years ago in 1998. The specifics of what led to Hickman's arrest could not be released, but he lived in the same neighborhood as Kimberly and Daniel at the time they lost their lives. In the early morning of March 5, 1995, Hickman picked up a mail. The mail had gasoline in a stored item, and they drove to the Fultons' home. The men then entered the home, where Kimberly and Daniel were sleeping in beds on opposite ends of the residence. The other man then smothered Daniel and Kimberly with a pillow in their beds. He then poured gasoline in the living room area of the home, set it on fire, and they left. On August 29, 2023, Hickman has been declared incompetent to stand trial. Hickman stands charged with 4 counts of aggravated slaying and 2 counts of slaying. Hickman's attorney, James Owen, filed a motion for a competency evaluation for his client. Judge Mark Carigny ruled that Hickman is incompetent to stand trial at this time, based on a competency evaluation completed by psychologist Dr. Andrew Reisner. Judge Carigny said, based upon the report, what I am going to have to do is find that the defendant is not capable of understanding the nature and objective of the proceedings against him. He is not capable of assisting in his defense. He does have, apparently, schizoaffective disorder, with his most prominent symptom being severe thought disorder. Based on the report, Judge Carigny says that Hickman could be restored to competency if he receives treatment. At that time, no treatment facility was able to take Hickman in, according to the defense attorneys. He was returned to the Washington County Jail. The man that was picked up by Hickman remains unidentified, but there was another arrest made in 2024. On May 15, 2024, 62-year-old Johnny Ray Ball was arrested. He was charged on the same day of 5 third-degree felony counts of perjury and 1 third-degree felony count of obstructing justice. Ball was then transported to the Washington County Jail. Ball was then arraigned on May 22nd in front of Judge Mark Carigny and was released on a personal recognizance bond. The conditions of Ball's bond is that he maintains contact with his attorney, appears at all future hearings, commits no further criminal acts, and signs a waiver of extradition. The waiver of extradition states that Ball waives any right to extradition from any other state if arrested for breach of his PR bond. The charges of perjury stem from the grand jury testimony where Ball, knowingly, made false statements under oath. The following is 5 instances where Ball made false statements. Firstly, he stated he was never in the vehicle with Scott Hickman the morning of March 5th, 1995. It also said that Ball stated that he was at the scene, drug hoses, and helped put the fire out. Thirdly, he stated that he found out 2 to 3 days later someone had lost their life in the fire, and he could not see the fire from his house because there was a field of corn blocking his view. Lastly, he testified that he did not see Scott Hickman the morning of the fire. Ball is being held until his arraignment in Washington County Common Pleas Court. Detective Jeff Severs said that Ball's involvement in the case is still being investigated, along with the involvement of others. When asked if Ball was the man described as the one who took the lives of the Fultons, Detective Severs said, "No, there is still a definite suspect. The case is still being investigated, as the investigators are not sure if there was a third person acting as a lookout or something else during the slayings." Detective Severs said, "We strongly believe there are 2 people who went into the house. Hickman is still considered not competent to stand trial, but the starting date for Ball's trial will still be announced." Detective Severs asked that people with information about the Fulton case contact him or Cold Case Unit Detective Bruce Shuck at 740-525-2483, and that the identity of anyone who does will be kept unknown. On a late December afternoon in 1989, Ruth Buchanan, a mother, was struck by a car as she was crossing a downtown North Carolina street after shopping with her friend at a department store. A driver in a dark-colored vehicle ran a red light and hit 52-year-old Ruth. Witnesses gave police detailed descriptions of the car, including the license plate number. Ruth passed away from her injuries the next day in a Charlotte hospital. Sergeant Gavin Jackson of the police department's major crash investigation unit said that her body landed on the opposite side of the intersection. According to witnesses, the vehicle continued and did not stop. The driver did not render aid. A few days later, officers responded to a call about a suspicious vehicle outside a Comfort Inn, which fit the description of the car involved in the collision. The vehicle later turned out to be stolen from a local car dealership. The 1989 hit and run went cold and remained unsolved for more than 3 decades. That was until the police said that DNA from a possible cigarette helped them find and charge a suspect. In 2022, law enforcement received an anonymous tip who claimed to know the man who committed the hit and run. That proved to be false. However, It did spur officers to take another look at the case. The detectives sent evidence previously recovered from the car to the police crime lab. They matched DNA from the cigarette to a man. Sergeant Jackson said that it was challenging because the positive DNA came back to an individual named Herbert Standback. At the time this incident occurred, he was shown incarcerated in prison at a place called Charlotte Correctional, which no longer exists. He was serving a 22-year sentence for a separate crime. Detectives learned that the driver, 68-year-old Standback, was working at a local hotel at the time of the hit and run as part of a work release program for inmates at the state prison. Authorities visited Standback twice at Scotland Correctional Institution in Laurinburg, North Carolina. On March 20th, 2024, Standback confessed to being the driver who struck Ruth in 1989. Sergeant Jackson said, "Interestingly, he was incarcerated at Charlotte Correctional, but he was on a work release program at the time where they would leave in the morning and come back in the evening." Standback told authorities he was working at the motel in Charlotte, a couple of blocks away from where Ruth was hit. And after driving away from the motel, the vehicle he was driving hit her and he fled the scene. Standback dumped the vehicle at the motel, and he ended up going back to prison that night. North Carolina state court records show that Standback was charged on July 17th with a felony hit and run in connection with Ruth's demise and sentenced to 2 years to be served at the same time as his current sentence. Sergeant Jackson said he later notified Ruth's son about the arrest. He said, "I was able to speak to Ruth's son and was able to bring that kind of closure to the family. It is certainly not a phone call that they would have been expecting." On November 26, 1988, detectives found 58-year-old Robert Hecht slain in his home on Rio Togas Road in Charlotte County, Florida. The Charlotte County Sheriff's Office happened upon the scene after concerned friends requested a wellness check at Robert's home. Detectives learned he had been hit in the head several times with a heavy glass ashtray while lying on the living room couch. According to the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office, Robert's new car was missing from the garage. It was presumed stolen. Robert bought his Lincoln around 1 month before he lost his life. Through their investigation, detectives learned he met a man named Ray the evening before his life was taken. The two were last seen at Fisherman's Village Oyster Bar before Robert told a friend that they were heading to another bar and then to his home. People who met Ray recalled his southern accent. He told people he was from Tennessee and Kentucky. He said he was separated from his wife and, at the time, had a 14-year-old daughter. Investigators were not able to fully identify Ray at the time. On November 28th, the car was seen parked on Main Street in Lenoir, North Carolina. It was seized by the Lenoir Police Department. The detectives searched Robert's home and car. They found 1 cigarette butt in both the home and the car. Robert's friends told investigators that he would allow people to smoke in his house, but not his car. They concluded that the cigarette in the house fell from the ashtray during the attack. They believe the one in the car belonged to the perpetrator. They were unfortunately unable to find a match, and the case went cold. In September 2021, cold case detectives looked at the case again and interviewed everyone they could. Thanks to advancements in DNA technology, they sent the cigarette butts from the house and the car off to labs again for testing. It was determined that DNA from the same person was present on both cigarettes. Since there was no match in CODIS, the detectives submitted the results for genealogical examination. From that, they found a family match in Tennessee. Through the process of elimination, interviews, and direct comparisons to family members, the source of the cigarette butt's DNA was identified as Kenneth Ray Miller. Ray would have been just 36 years old at the time of the slaying. Investigators showed witnesses who met Ray photographs of him. They identified Ray as the person that was with Robert on the night of November 26th. One of the witnesses even said they saw Ray in Robert's house that morning. He was sitting on the end of the same couch where Robert's body was found. To the witness, it appeared Ray had slept there given that he had a blanket over his legs. Detectives learned Ray passed away in 2007 of natural causes at the age of 55. He had a long criminal history, including aggravated battery, burglary, arson, and other crimes. The case was officially closed on March 22, 2024, by the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office. Robert's loved ones were also contacted about the news. While Ray is not alive to do time for the crime, Robert's family has their long sought-after answers. Mike Vogel, a detective for the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office, said, "I talked to his sister. She was obviously very happy to have the case resolved, and thankful for all the work that cold case put into the investigation." In February 1967, the unidentified remains of an individual were discovered in Sonoma County, California, at the bottom of a cliff north of Jenner. The remains belonged to a woman that was between 5'2" and 5'4" tall. She wore a long-sleeved white blouse that buttoned down the back. She also wore light-colored pants. It was determined that her life likely ended the prior year. Her manner of demise was ruled a slaying. She had multiple skull and rib fractures. Despite investigators' attempts, the woman could not be identified. She became known as Sonoma County Jane Doe. A forensic composite was developed. It was released to the public in hopes that it would generate new leads about her identity. There was no match. The woman was buried at the County of Sonoma Cemetery. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. In 2009, her body was exhumed with the assistance of anthropology professor Dr. Mark Griffin from San Francisco State University. The examination determined that Jane Doe was a white female between 40 and 46 years old. In 2022, the California Department of Justice, in collaboration with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, submitted forensic evidence to Othram, hoping that advanced DNA testing could assist with the identification of the woman. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. Othram's in-house genealogy team used the DNA profile in a forensic genetic genealogy search to produce new investigative leads, which were returned to investigators. A follow-up investigation was conducted by law enforcement with the new leads. This led to relatives of the unidentified woman. Nearly 60 years after the remains were discovered in Sonoma County, the remains have been identified as Lillian Marie Cardenas, who was born in 1928. Lillian's last known residence was in San Francisco. She had been estranged from her family prior to her demise. The investigation into her demise is ongoing. Investigators ask for anyone with information on Lillian Marie Cardenas to dial 707-565-2727 or email officials at sheriff-coldcase@sonoma-county.org. In May 2001, the partial skeletal remains of an unidentified individual were discovered in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada. The Royal Newfoundland Constabulary responded to the scene. The remains were discovered in a wooded area off Minerals Road in Conception Bay South. It was determined that the remains were that of a male who had dark, curly, shoulder-length hair. He was between the ages of 18 and 29 years old at the time of his demise. Investigators worked tirelessly to confirm the identity of the man. They were unsuccessful. He became known as Conception Bay John Doe. It was determined that Conception Bay John Doe's life ended due to slaying. An isotope analysis was performed. Forensic sketches were developed over the years and were released to the public. Investigators hoped that it would assist in the identification of the slain man. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement investigators to identify the man, no matches were found. The case then went cold due to a lack of viable leads. After continued efforts to identify the man, the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary submitted forensic evidence to Othram in August 2021. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive genealogical profile for the victim. They then used this profile to conduct genealogy research. This ultimately provided new investigative leads to law enforcement. A follow-up investigation was conducted using this new information. The genealogical research and subsequent investigation determined that his ancestry traced to the Iberian Peninsula, which is made up largely by the countries of Spain and Portugal. However, low genetic matches and the lack of historical records complicated the search and development of the case. Genetic relatives were traceable to Cuba. Unfortunately, reference testing necessary to home in on the identity of the John Doe presented unique challenges. In early 2024, after 23 years, there was a breakthrough in the investigation when a match was made to a first cousin of the man. With this newly identified relative, potential family members residing in Cuba were identified for interviews and reference testing. This led to the identification of Conception Bay John Doe as Temístoclé Temi Fernandez Casas. Temi was originally from Cuba. He went missing in Canada over 2 decades ago after traveling from Cuba to Quebec City on a tourist visa in April 1992. There is no record of his travels from Quebec City to Newfoundland and Labrador. It is believed that his life ended between 1997 and 1998. It is also believed that he would have been in his early 30s at the time of his demise. According to stable isotope analysis that was preformed post-mortem, Temi has spent most his time in southern Quebec and/or the northeastern United States. However, closer examination of the man's dentition and hair revealed that he most likely had left the area approximately 18 months prior to his demise. It also shows that he had been traveling extensively around the east coast of Canada within 13 months of his demise. With Temi positively identified, investigators are looking to put together a timeline of his movements in the last years and months of his life. The Royal Newfoundland Constabulary is looking to speak to any known associates of Temi. They are particularly looking to speak to a Joanne Bergeron. It is believed that she has also spent time in Cuba prior to April 1992, where she worked as a travel agent. Today, she would be approximately 68 years old. A dedicated email has been established to reach the investigative team directly. Please contact report@rnc.gov.nl.ca with any information. You can also call 709-729-8000. To report anonymously, contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-TIPS 8477 or visit www.nlcrimestoppers.com. In September 1979, a hunter stumbled upon skeletal remains in the area of Highway 175 between mile markers .80 and .83 in Lake County, California, just northwest of Sacramento. Investigators were called to the scene. They determined that the remains were that of a female whose ancestry could not be definitively determined. The woman was estimated to be between 25 and 35 years old at the time of her demise. It was estimated to be between 1976 and 1979. The woman's height was determined to be between 5'1" and 5'4". No other identifying characteristics could be determined. In June 2019, case details were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. With limited identifying characteristics available, the woman's identity remained unknown for nearly 5 decades, despite the efforts of law enforcement. Throughout the years, the Lake County Sheriff's Office followed up with the California Department of Justice to use emerging technology to identify Jane Doe. In 2023, the California Department of Justice, in collaboration with the Lake County Sheriff's Office, submitted forensic evidence to Othram, hopes that advanced DNA testing and forensic genetic genealogy could help generate new leads to identify the woman. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. Once the profile was successfully built, Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team produced new investigative leads that were provided to the Lake County Sheriff's Office. Using these new leads, the Lake County Sheriff's Office continued their investigation, which led to genetic relatives of the woman. A reference sample was collected from a potential relative and compared to the DNA profile of the woman. After nearly 50 years, this comparison confirmed the identity of Lake County Jane Doe as Wanda Lee Brewer. She was born in Arkansas and later moved to California. An investigation into the circumstances around Wanda's demise continues. In October 1985, the partial skeletal remains of an unidentified individual were discovered in a plastic bag near Channel Islands Harbor in Oxnard, California. The Ventura County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene. It was determined that the remains were that of a female. She was between the ages of 35 and 50 years old at her time of demise. No other identifying information for the woman was available. In 2016, details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. A clay facial reconstruction was developed and released to the public in hopes that it would generate new leads in the case. For many years, investigators followed leads and made comparisons in an attempt to identify the Jane Doe. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement investigators to identify the woman, no matches were found. The case went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In May 2023, the Ventura County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit, in collaboration with the Ventura County Medical Examiner's Office, submitted forensic evidence to Othram. They were hoping to determine if advanced DNA testing could help identify the woman. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the provided evidence. They used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team then used this profile to conduct extensive genetic genealogy research, ultimately providing new investigative leads to law enforcement. A follow-up investigation was conducted using the new leads. This led investigators to potential relatives of the woman. A reference sample was collected from a potential relative and compared to the DNA profile of the woman. After nearly 40 years, they had a positive identification of the woman, who is now known to be Gertrude Elliot-Littlehale, born in 1864. While Gertrude's life ended in 1915 and was buried, law enforcement received a tip several decades ago that a grave had been robbed and a skull was taken. This was Gertrude's grave that had been disturbed. Gertrude was laid to rest in the Stockton Rural Cemetery. Gertrude was born in Red Bluff in 1865. When she was young, the Elliots moved to Stockton, where Gertrude's father became a prominent attorney. At the age of 16, she graduated high school and, with her remarkable talent for music, was admitted to the Boston Conservatory. Young Gertrude was soon studying in Paris and traveling the world as a musician, but home still called to her, and by adulthood, she was settled back in Stockton, teaching piano and singing. It was in this capacity that she touched countless young lives who came to dearly love Miss Elliot. In addition to her teaching jobs, she was the president and founder of the Saturday Afternoon Club, a women's club that brought renowned musical acts to Stockton. In 1907, at the age of 42, Gertrude and her longtime partner, James Littlehale, decided to marry. The happy couple welcomed a baby daughter named Louise the next year. The family's new chapter was a tragically short one, however. In December 1915, Gertrude was struck with an acute case of appendicitis. She underwent surgery in San Francisco and seemed to be recovering when, 2 weeks later, she suddenly passed away. Her sudden demise at the age of 50 shocked a legion of loved ones who adored her. She was buried beneath a large headstone. It was perhaps the grandeur of this headstone that caught the eye of a grave robber more than half a century later. Despite Gertrude having lost her life nearly 110 years ago, Othram scientists were able to successfully extract DNA from these skeletal remains. They built an ultra-sensitive DNA profile and performed the genealogical research to identify Gertrude's remains. In October 1993, two hunters stumbled upon the partial skeletal remains of an unidentified individual on an old vacant lot near Apopka that had been used as a vegetable farm in Orlando, Florida. The remains were provided to the Orange County Sheriff's Office. They conducted an excavation of the area on the following day in an effort to recover additional remains. Upon examination, it was determined that the remains were that of a white male who was between the ages of 45 and 55 years at the time of his demise. The manner of demise was also classified as slaying. No other identifying characteristics could be determined due to the limited information and the condition of the remains. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, the man's identity remained unknown for over 3 decades. In 2023, the Orange County Sheriff's Office submitted forensic evidence to Othram. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence and used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown victim. Once the profile was successfully built, Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team produced new investigative leads that were provided to the Orange County Sheriff's Office. The Orange County Sheriff's Office used these new leads to continue a follow-up investigation, which led them to genetic relatives of the man. A reference sample was collected from a potential relative and compared to the DNA profile of the man. This comparison confirmed the identity of Orange County John Doe as 48-year-old Richard Wick. Wick moved to Florida from New York. He was reported missing by his family, with whom he was in touch with regularly, after he failed to contact them for an extended period of time. Officials are now asking for any information that might assist in bringing closure to the cold case and bringing justice to Richard and resolution to his family. You are asked to contact the Orange County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit at 407-836-4357 or call the crime line at 800-423-TIPS. In September 1986, the remains of an unidentified individual were discovered in the Columbia River by the Pioneer Memorial Bridge, also known as the Blue Bridge, which connects Pasco, Washington to Kennewick, Washington. Only the lower torso remains were found. It is believed that her remains had been in the water for at least 6 months. After the remains were discovered, an autopsy was performed by the Benton County Coroner's Office. It was determined that the remains were that of a white female. She was between the ages of 28 to 35 years at her time of demise. The cause of demise could not be determined, despite extensive efforts by law enforcement investigators to identify the woman. They were unsuccessful. The case went cold due to a lack of viable leads. The woman was buried as a Jane Doe at Rest Haven Cemetery in Richland, Washington. In September 2023, the Benton County Coroner's Office exhumed Jane Doe's remains, hoping that advanced DNA testing could help to identify the woman. After the exhumation process was complete, skeletal evidence was prepared for transport to Othram by the Benton County Coroner's Office. They then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. A follow-up investigation was conducted using the new leads. This led investigators to potential relatives of the woman. Reference DNA samples were collected from a potential relative and compared to the DNA profile of the unknown woman. This investigation led to the positive identification of the woman, who is now known to be Patricia Kay Ereth, born December 12, 1949. She was known to be missing from the Yakima, Washington area since the early 1980s. Patricia was last seen leaving the Peking Palace restaurant on N First Street in Yakima. Peking Palace is no longer in business. She was returning to her office. She had 4 children at the time of her disappearance. She was reported missing by her family on February 6, 1983. The reason for her disappearance may never be known. Yakima police has been contacted and made aware of Patricia's identification. In April 1983, the skeletal remains of an unidentified individual were discovered by children in a culvert in what is now Lake Forest, California. Upon responding to the scene in the area of Old Trabuco and Canada Roads, an excavation was performed to recover additional remains belonging to the individual. Upon examination, it was determined that the remains were that of a female who was likely black or mixed race. The woman was estimated to be between 5'3" and 5'6" tall and between the ages of 18 and 24 years. Jane Doe was also reported to have a distinctive gold tooth. It was determined that the woman was a victim of slaying. In August 2010, details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Multiple forensic renderings of the woman were released over the years. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement investigators to identify the woman, no matches were found. The case went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In 2022, the Orange County Sheriff's Department submitted forensic evidence to Othram, hoping that advanced DNA testing could help to finally identify the woman. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence and used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. After successfully completing the process, the DNA profile was delivered to the FBI's Forensic Genetic Genealogy team, and the FBI team performed the necessary work to generate new investigative leads in the case. Using these new leads, investigators contacted a distant genetic relative of the victim, who suggested Jane Doe's forensic renderings be posted to a Facebook group for Jane Does and missing women from the 1970s and 1980s. Approximately 1 month after the posting, a woman contacted investigators and said she believed the Lake Forest Jane Doe could be her missing mother. Lake Forest Jane Doe is now known to be Maritza Glean Grimmett, a Panamanian native, married a U.S. Marine in the summer of 1978, and gave birth to a daughter. In late 1978, the family moved to the U.S. The family resided in Columbus, Ohio, and Millington, Tennessee, in late 1978 through mid-1979. In July 1979, the couple was going through a divorce. Maritza told her sister she was going to California. Her family never heard from her again since. She was 20 years old at the time of her disappearance. Investigators are actively investigating Maritza's slaying. Anyone with information on this case is asked to contact investigator Bob Taft at 714-647-7045 or coldcase@oaksheriff.gov. Anonymous tips may be submitted to OC Crime Stoppers at 855-847-6227 or at occrimestoppers.org. In December 2003, the remains of an unidentified individual were discovered in a wooded area that is frequented by hunters in Christmas, Florida. Landscape workers made the discovery while working off of Taylor Creek Road in the small community located just east of Orlando. The Orange County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene. It was determined that the remains were that of a white female who is estimated to be 5'3", tall, and between 24 and 29 years old. She had brown hair and wore 2 clear stone post earrings, 1 gold-colored ring, and 2 bracelets. An investigation led by the Orange County Sheriff's Office ruled the woman's manner of demise as slaying. She became known as Christmas Jane Doe. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Over the years, multiple women were excluded as being Christmas Jane Doe. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement investigators to identify the woman, no matches were found. and the case went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In March 2022, the Orange County Sheriff's Office submitted forensic evidence to Othram. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. After successfully completing the process, the DNA profile was delivered to the FBI's Forensic Genetic Genealogy team. They performed the necessary work to generate new investigative leads in the case. A follow-up investigation was conducted using the new leads. This led investigators to potential relatives of the woman. As a result of this investigation, the woman is now known to be 26-year-old Holly Rose Levines Garcia. She was never reported missing. At the time of her disappearance, Holly was married to Miguel Angel Garcia Rivera. Investigators are currently searching for Miguel. Deputies believe Holly, a wife and mother, lived at Palm Bay Apartments off South Sonoran Boulevard in 2002. They also believe she lived at Hollowbrook Apartments off Curry Ford Road in 2003. The Orange County Sheriff's Office now seeks the public's help in solving the case of Holly. If you knew Holly or have any information about her life or the circumstances surrounding her demise, please contact the Orange County Sheriff's Office. In January 1992, the remains of an unidentified individual were discovered alongside the Pennsylvania Turnpike in Clay Township, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania State Police, PSP, arrived at the scene and determined that the remains were that of a male. He was estimated to be 5'10" tall and between 18 and 30 years old. The reason for his demise was believed to be slang. At the time of the man's discovery, he was wearing a Kate Collins brand light blue long sleeve sweater, as well as a size 36 pair of men's Fruit of the Loom jockey style underwear. The man also had a scar on his chest from a previous bullet wound that had healed. In April 2017, details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement investigators to identify the man, no matches were found. The case went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In 2022, the Pennsylvania State Police submitted forensic evidence to Othram. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown man. After successfully completing the process, the DNA profile was delivered to a PSP analyst who performed the necessary work to generate new investigative leads in the case. A follow-up investigation was conducted using the new leads that led investigators to potential relatives of the man. This investigation led to the positive identification of the man, who is now known to be Derek Michael Mason. Derek was last seen leaving his home in the 500 block of South 39th Street in West Philadelphia in October 1991. Derek was known in the area by the names Hawkeye and Hawk. He was never reported missing. Anyone with information regarding the slaying of Derek Mason is asked to contact Trooper Brian McNally, PSP Lancaster, at 717-290-1967. PSP Tips is offering a $2,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest in this case.